Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to have a guest today, one of my favorite people, but also a fantastic journalist, a journalist that actually goes to the places she talks about, which is a rarity these days. Fiorella Isabel, welcome.
Thank you, Vanessa. Very happy to be here with you.
Yeah. You've been somewhere really interesting and really topical. Do you just want to let people know where you've just come back from? And then we can go into talking about your experience there.
Yes, so again, thank you for having me on. I just got back from the occupied West Bank, Palestinian territories that are clearly occupied by the Zionist regime. And a lot of attention has been focused on Gaza because of obvious reasons. The fact that, 33,000+ Gazans have died as a result of Israeli shelling, Israeli bombs, Israeli deliberate assassinations, attacks at refugee camps, hospitals, and all of these things that we have all seen on our phones and screens for the last 6 months. But the West Bank is a living example of a modern day apartheid society where you have two different classes of people. And I think that from what I saw, people there try to live as normally as possible, but they still have this fear in the back of their head that they could be next, right? And so I went there to basically try to talk to some people who were living there, who are from there, and get their opinions as to what's going on and how the world has reacted, but also specifically to point out the hypocrisy of the hostages, the Israeli hostages that have been plastered all over our media, not just in mainstream media, but even in friendly media as the victims of October 7th. And the music festival victims that were taken by Hamas, and how, we need to send them home, free them, and do all of this, bring them home. That was the chant. And from the minute you hit the airport, you land in Tel Aviv, and you see these pictures of all these hostages and how it's terrible, and look what Hamas is doing. They put that all over for you to see from the moment you land at the airport. But what they don't talk about are the 8,000 plus Palestinians that have been held in Israeli jails, and for no reason, who have no trials, who don't get to see their families, don't get to see lawyers, who don't have access to any sort of outside information. And their families are just sitting there waiting for any sign of news, waiting for a miracle, waiting for people to really talk about their stories that get ignored because the Palestinian who sit in jail in prisons in the occupied West Bank are severely mistreated. They don't even get beds. They get rotten food. They get completely beat up and abused every single day. And nobody says bring them home. Nobody even takes into account that there are these thousands of detainees who are held without trial. And other numbers from Palestinian officials have said more than 10,000, because since October 7th, obviously, things have increased. And since October 7th is why I wanted to go, because there has been an increase of assassinations, an increase of abuse, and the checkpoints that Palestinians have to go through have gotten increasingly tough to cross, or roads have been completely closed, making it impossible for them to travel for work or for any reason, and making them have to go the long way for them to do anything. And just being there with them and experiencing how we had to go a certain direction because I was in a Palestinian car with Palestinian plates and not Israeli plates, really just highlights the type of society they live in. So that's just for starters, what I saw.
I mean, it's the first time you've been, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your impression? I mean, what was your expectation of getting through security in the airport, for example? What were your first impressions when you got there?
I was extremely fearful of getting completely rejected because
Mm,
even though it's my first time, I have been very clear about what I think about what I was doing and how I've called it a genocide. And just politically, as a journalist, it's just talking about anything truthful. We've seen what Israel has done to journalists, Palestinian and including Americans, of course. And so I was afraid that I wasn't going to get let in. And I would advise anybody going to Israel that actually wants to do journalism to take the necessary precautions to do so, because you need to make sure your phones and your laptops are completely wiped and all of that. But
mm,
I was afraid that there was going to be a rejection, and there wasn't. And I think that was due to the fact that it was my first time. I think coming after will be increasingly difficult. And I think that especially now, Israel has been very clear that they don't want what is happening in Gaza to get shown with their targeting of journalists, and even aid workers, right? And so in
mm.
the occupied West Bank, the attention hasn't been put on as much, but I think that will be increasing as people go and really report what's happening. And we see that from people who live there and from journalists who reside in areas like Ramallah or Jenin, that people are getting killed in a fight of the resistance against the settler occupation, which is expanding exponentially. And so for me, my expectations were that it was going to be more difficult to get in, but at the same time, I felt an air of just complete and total negativity. I felt an air of just,
Mm.
I don't know, like an energy of just doom coming in there. It didn't feel good to be in Tel Aviv, and I really got out of there as soon as I could. They definitely don't want you going into the Ramallah. They definitely don't want you going into these areas. You should say you're not going there.
Right. What gave you that impression? Did they say anything to you, or did you just get that impression, or is it just really difficult to get to those areas?
It's difficult to get to the area because you have to take a cab that is able to cross there and wants to do that. Number one. Number two,
Mm,
they did ask, where are you going? And if you do say the occupied West Bank at all, you might likely be rejected. They will ask why you're
mm,
going there, because why would you want to go there when you have, beautiful, expensive Tel Aviv with the nice, luxurious buildings that are like hotels that are like 300 a night, and Jerusalem. It is a historically beautiful city, like in terms of history and all of that. But again, most Palestinians, unless they have some sort of Israeli approval or passport, cannot go to Jerusalem,
mm.
or Quds. And so they are completely kind of weirded out if you're going into the occupied West Bank. Less so Jerusalem, obviously, because it's such a touristy
Yeah.
area. So yeah, they definitely will ask, and then go from there. So you have to know how to answer the
Mm, mm,
questions.
mm. Um, for those that claim that the Zionist entity is not an apartheid state, what would be your answer now that you've been there?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I don't know what their definition of an apartheid state is, but my definition is a society that is completely living as second or less than second class citizens to another society
Mm,
that's in control of absolutely every aspect of their movement, of their freedom. Palestinians can't go anywhere without the approval of of the Israeli settlers, for example. And it's not just the government; it's the people who live who are Israeli settlers too. It's not just, oh, this is the Israeli government and the military that's doing this. It's regular people who have taken it upon themselves to harass Palestinians because they see them as less than. For example, I put this example to people. If you, for example, live in the United States and you live in like a suburb of New York, you need like an entire passport from the US government, whatever, to cross into a different city. So let's say you're in like Albany, New York, and you want to go to like Buffalo or New York City, you need a special pass. And if you don't have that pass, you can't go. And if you have to work, well, and you have that pass, they will completely close down and shut down roads. So you have to go around the long way. So, for example, if you usually take the highway, forget it, the highway's closed. And now you have to go around, which can take up to 4, 5, 6, 7 hours there and back, or even just one way, depending on how slow the checkpoints are. And so to get to Jenin took a long time from Ramallah. And Ramallah is a city where, of course, the Palestinian Authority is in charge, and you see the Palestinian Authority there. But the Palestinian Authority is really no authority. They are not in charge at all. They are mocked constantly by every single person I've talked to, from the Palestinians that wanted to remain anonymous, from the ones that, you know, are a little bit more less radical to the most radical ones. They all have mocked the Palestinian Authority because there is no authority. They are completely under the thumb of the Zionists, and they do everything that they want. And they sit around there, especially in Ramallah, with their guarding and with their weapons. And you know, one of the people I was with who took me to a refugee camp in Albira, she was telling me how it's just, you know, it's a joke because they have absolutely no authority. And so that is just an essence of it, right? You have an authority that doesn't have any power for Palestinians, yet they're called the Palestinian Authority. Simultaneously, the Zionists obviously control the water, the electricity, any sort of movement, so you can't say you're free. So how is that not apartheid? Also, in terms of housing, they are constantly expanding. I went into an area where these farmers, Palestinian farmers, were growing olive trees, and you could see the fences and the different definitions of expansion coming in. And you can clearly see the two different types of living. One is a very just very capitalistic, but more than capitalistic, it's just very materialistic, very just look over the top, luxurious type of Israeli build. The other one is Palestinian, and it's more focused on farming and more like just very much just two completely opposing views of how to live your life. And I'm not saying that there aren't nice Palestinian houses, but I am saying that just the way it's done, it's completely contrasting, and it's actually very representative of how these people live their lives and how they view the world. And so you know, there's an arrogance from the Israeli settlers in terms of how they build things, how they just want to concrete everything and make it, you know, a bunch of malls and a bunch of beachfront properties, whereas the Palestinians seem to live in essence with the land and the trees and farming and all of these things that a lot of the people who value, you know, anti-imperialism and freedom really we hold dearly. And it was just very nauseating to see how just clear that is. And if that's not apartheid, I don't know what is.
Did you, because, you know, to a large degree, one of the things that terrifies the Zionist entity is unity and solidarity between resistance factions. And of course, they've orchestrated and engineered the divisions between, for example, Hamas and Fatah. But even beyond that, of course, they've exacerbated sectarian divisions across the region to try and weaken the region to their benefit. Did you, when you were in the occupied territories, did you get a feeling that Gaza was perceived as separate, or did you get the feeling that there was unity between the people living under occupation and the people living under siege and basically extermination campaigns in Gaza?
From what I spoke to, there is unity in terms of the people, in terms of the
Mm,
Palestinians living in the West Bank. They see what's happening in Gaza as something that is happening to all of Palestinians and something that shouldn't be happening. And that's an overall general feeling that I got from talking. It was always mentioned, and there are
mm,
also refugees from Gaza living in the
mm,
West Bank who are staying there and are trying to start, you know, their lives, very well knowing that they will face similar harassment and similar difficulties from the Zionist settlers, but also knowing that this is something that they said, at least this is not Gaza. Understanding that obviously they're not being bombarded at that level. They're not being, you know, attacked at that level. But in terms of the resistance, one of the opinions that differs is some believe there needs to be more of a connection, that there needs to be more of a talking to between these factions, and that there needs to be more communication, that has to increase a little bit more, because there is a huge fight going on in the West Bank that I don't think
mm,
people have been paying attention to between the resistance forces that are not Hamas, right? And they have
mm,
been, especially in areas like Jenin, they have been fighting against the Israeli Zionists and dying, many of them dying, of course, in these fights. And I interviewed two mothers, one of them who was her son was actually jailed for 5 years, and he was shot more than 10 times by the IDF, including in the head. And he was made to be a paraplegic from the
mm,
middle to lower limbs of his body. And he recently got out towards the end of Ramadan, and finally, but he came home as a paraplegic. And I posted a video of that just to show how
mm,
he looked with before he came in and how he got out. And he, of course, was shot because he was resisting the Zionist regime. And again, when I say that, I think some people could say, "Oh, well, you know, he deserved to be jailed." No, it's illegal. It's legal for Palestinians uh, to resist. It's illegal
mm,
under international law. And so it's not a crime for them to resist. That's like saying it's a crime for you to stop somebody from stealing your home and from, you know, harassing you in your own house and pointing a gun to your face. So these are the things that I think for people in the United States and Europe, it's hard to wrap their head around that they have the ability to resist, which is ironic because the United States is, you know, very much focused on defending their national security. And we have people here trying to defend their freedom, their liberty, trying to fight for it. And of course, they are jailed. And these are the most abled men, right? These are younger men
yeah.
in their 20s, right? Or even less sometimes. And um, they want to defend their families, and they willingly go to do this. They don't see another way. They see it as something that must be done. And the other mother I spoke to, she her video will be coming out soon. It's a longer interview, so it's taking time with the translation. But she lost her son to Israeli settlers in Jenin, and she lived right around the area where Shireen Abu Akleh was assassinated 2 years ago. So again, when we talk about Hamas, it's not Hamas. And there is no Hamas, but the Israeli settlers use Hamas even in the West Bank to
Mm,
say that they have affiliations with Hamas. They specifically use the word Hamas, especially after October 7th, trying to come in and barge in people's homes. And the hotel I was in actually raided. It was actually like a home of apartments, not really a hotel. And people, stay there. And it was also raided, and two young men, like teenagers, were shot as well and killed in the streets
Mm.
nearby. And that was in Alberia. So what we're talking about here is actual assassinations taking place by Israel, forcing people to allow them to take everything from them, not just their homes, but their ability to make a choice, their freedom to target, for example, brothers, and every single one of these brothers, every single family member, to threaten the mothers just to give in information, right? And just because these people fight against Israel and they're unwilling to give in and they're resisting, doesn't make them culpable. It doesn't make them guilty of anything. It doesn't make them uh, uh, some sort of just perpetrator to be jailed for no reason. But there is no trial. There is no law that is defending them. So when people sit here at the UN or at any other international organization talking about diplomacy with Israel, I just get so angry, because apart from what's being done in Gaza, they want to do the same thing to people in the West Bank.
Yeah, and I think they have effectively been cutting communities off from each other by destroying the
Yeah.
roads and bridges and infrastructure and so on, in preparation potentially for creating these kind of ghettos that would be under complete military control after, of course, ethnically cleansing them to a greater or lesser degree. Um, One thing that I wanted to ask you, because it's something, again, that Palestinians are accused of, and it's something that I never found evidence of inside Gaza, which is hate. People, I think they tend to project kind of Western psychological values onto the Palestinians and assume that after almost 100 years of dispossession and apartheid and oppression and ethnic cleansing, that they're going to be a people full of hate. And yet I found personally exactly the opposite in Gaza. So I'd be really interested to hear your impressions having been in the occupied territories.
Palestinian people are by far the most resilient people I have ever met. I mean, I've met resilience here in Donbass, and in these
Mm.
areas that have also suffered so much. But going into the West Bank and talking especially to these mothers, these families of people who have been taken or who have been killed by Israel, they make the best of their situation, and I can't even imagine being able to do that. I would be so consumed by just hatred and anger, I think, at these people, but they continue to live their lives in a way that remembers the martyred, right? That remembers those who are gone in a way that is hard for, again, the Western world to understand martyrdom, to understand what it means, and to understand that it is a significant thing to die resisting and to
Mm.
die fighting, and there is pride in that, and there is glory in that, and there is, in a way, happiness. And they make jokes, and they offer you tea, and they're so kind, and they are so just welcoming to people, and no matter who you are, and this unity and helping each other in this community that I've seen from different people who live in Palestine, being able to just unite in that way and help each other out. It's just so kind. And it's interesting because the way they are, I don't think a lot of us in the West could ever be that just it's hard to describe how kind you can be in a state where you have families that are in Gaza, you have neighbors that are in Gaza, or you have come from Gaza, and here you are in the occupied West Bank, and you're seeing entirely how things are and how things could be continue to be negative, but you appreciate that you can eat, that you can go outside. And of course, I was there during Ramadan, so people were out shopping for iftar. They were out getting food. They were out gathering together. I went into the city. People were shopping for whatever clothing. It's still, you still have that semblance of normality in a society, and you still have people going about with their children and trying to do these gatherings with each other, and you have that in spite of the fact that at around the same time there is this continued persecution of the Palestinian people in Gaza and also in these areas. When night comes, especially, is when the Zionists attack these areas. And so it's like they are very good at trying to live, laugh, really laugh, and find the joy in all situations that I think we wouldn't be able to in the West to find joy in. And I find that to be extraordinary that they are willing and able to do that. And people were so kind to me, even though I don't speak Arabic. I was able to go and eventually figure out what times to try to eat food, and I found the hummus was amazing, and hummus is Palestinian and it's not Israeli, just for people who are confused about that. And it was very, people were just very kind and very patient. And and living in Russia too, it's a different, people are kind, but it's a completely different vibe. Palestinians are just so just they laugh a lot, and that's not something you would expect from people who have endured so much.
I mean, I think that sense of humor, I mean, I found it in Gaza. It's definitely here in Syria. It is a kind of coping mechanism, but it's also I think it's just something born out of dealing with adversity on a ridiculous scale. That we in the West have actually, well, neither of us are in the West, but you know what I mean. We've never had to really face to that extent. And I quite often sort of get criticism from Western anti-imperialists because I make a joke that they consider to be insensitive, and my response is often, well, actually, that joke was given to me by a Syrian, because you do develop this sort of, and I am careful. I mean, I don't make those kind of jokes with my family because I know that they just wouldn't get it at all, But so I completely understand that. Even friends in Gaza, when I'm speaking to them, they'll, I'm sort of trying to find the right way to say something, and they just crack me up. They just come up with a joke. And one friend who used to smoke, I don't know, 3-4 packets a day, he said, Vanessa, one cigarette costs $4.50. Like, it's killing me, that is, and but that's what sort of keeps them sane, and having been in those situations, I get it. But I think the last question I want to ask, because again, it's something that is constantly under discussion, is the issue of the two-state solution. Because, diplomatically, Russia and China are still maintaining the kind of holy grail of the two-state solution, which, as you know, has been dead in the water for some time and is nothing more than a political sleight of hand to maintain pressure and the ability to bargain and so on and so forth, right? It's a political ploy. But having been in the occupied territories, having seen the encroachment and increase and expansion of settlements and so on, and how those settlements have carved up what is, under UN mandate, Palestinian territory, how realistic is the two-state solution?
Jeez. Uh, you can't live in apartheid. I mean, you can't have a two-state solution with a fascist entity, and that is what Zionism is. They've used this cloak of Judaism to try to distract from the fact that they view Palestinians the same way Nazis view pretty much everyone that's not a Nazi. This is this
Mm.
is just how they live their life. And this is something that's just limited to the government. This is something these settlers and the people of Israel mostly agree with. The majority of them agreed with what was going on in Gaza, with what's happening right now as we speak to people in Gaza, the starvation, the bombing, all of these things. The majority of people don't have a problem with that. Even the people protesting Netanyahu have a problem with the fact that their hostages aren't released, but they don't have a problem with what the government actually did. They have a problem with the fact that the government's failed to do what their military objective was, but they don't really care about the 33,000 plus people that have died. They have no moral compass because this is how kids are raised. They are raised with this belief that they are superior. So you can't eradicate that with a two-state solution. What would end up happening, because Israel's entire existence depends on it, is Israel will continue expanding into Lebanon, into Syria, into Jordan, into even Egypt. I mean, this is their entire agenda, and they have been very, very kind to let the entire world know that this is exactly what they want to do. It's just that people are either not listening or are just lying to themselves, thinking that this could be solved in a diplomatic way. We have seen the solution to stopping Israel and stopping the genocide. It is literally doing what Iran just did in attacking the military targets and objectives. It is doing what Ansar Allah has been doing in attacking their military and economic areas. And that is the only way to defeat Israel. To completely remove Israel, to, I would add, out of the economic spectrum and completely subjugate them away and create a Palestinian state. That is, of course, you don't kick people out. You don't necessarily go and divide people and send them away, but you put people that are guilty in jail. You have trials. You put Netanyahu and others in The Hague. You do the right thing. Sure, use international law if you want, but at the end of the day, that would happen after. And there is no two-state solution when one state thinks they are superior to the other. And when people are living in this way because they are thought less than, you don't eradicate that overnight. And if anything taught us that, South Africa taught us that a long time ago. It took time, and still today they have problems because you don't eradicate this mentality. You can eradicate certain things that are very tangible and stop crime, a criminal from committing a crime, but the thought process, the education, the brainwashing, the propaganda, all of that takes time. And again, the United States is another example. When we did have slaves and then we did have segregation, we still have problems dealing with that today. It doesn't all go away magically, and you can't have a society where people live separated or segregated. It just doesn't work. So why on earth would people still be pushing that? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, I think it's a politically safe bet, isn't it? Whether it's achievable or not, it is irrelevant. It's just a kind of let's not rock the diplomatic boat concept, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's time to end all of that. I think we've gone way past the point of diplomacy and even political.
Way. Yeah.
And I do think with President Putin actually coming out and saying Iran did absolutely the correct thing under international law, that's a pretty big statement. And I think, gradually we're going to see to what extent the Iranian True Promise operation has literally turned the world upside down, and I think that's going to become more and more apparent little by little, as we see the reactions from Russia, from China, even from Israel and the United States, they're terrified. And, you know, in all honesty, I said this morning, there's all sorts of, you know, sources said this and sources said that stories going around. And bottom line is they're hedging. You know, they know now that if Israel directly attacks Iran, it's going to take 12 seconds for Iran to respond, and they're not going to be prepared. They had 12 days preparation, you know, and they were informed that Iran was going to respond. It wasn't any surprise for them. But if they go ahead and retaliate, then it's going to be a very different story. And it just actually, in my opinion, depends to what extent they want to push for World War III, or to what extent they do want to de-escalate, because they're not prepared for an all-out war with the entire regional resistance axis and potentially China and Russia coming in on the side of the resistance axis, basically, because they're not going to side with the US. So, you know, it's interesting times, but I think we're going to see very clearly that what Iran did has really changed the rules of the game very, very successfully, actually, and without killing anyone. That's the most extraordinary thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, what Iran did is, and honestly, what Yemen has done has been far more than anything the majority of the entire world and its leadership and these diplomatic agencies have done for centuries. I mean, this is it's just obvious that that's what needed to be done. It's what needs to be done. And the only thing needed is for the entire world to really support that. And again, like as you just said, they didn't go after civilians, and that's, you know, some people want that, right? Some people want revenge, and this is both, it goes all the time to Russia. It's asked by Putin, you need to just flatten, you know, all of Ukraine, and Iran needs to go and just get rid of all the Zionists. But that mentality is not how these people operate. That's not how this side operates. They've never operated like that. China as well. They don't operate this way. They're not a tit for tat society. The United States, the Western perspective, that's how we approach things in the West. You know, it's okay. It doesn't matter. We have collateral damage. Like, it doesn't matter. It was dirty. War is bad. So we're just going to have a bunch of dead civilians. But in some ways, Russia has even made itself vulnerable, and Iran as well has clearly lost many because they have refused to engage in the lowly tactics of attacking civilians. And I think that is something that doesn't show weakness. I think that actually shows strength and the real moral virtue of, like, how they don't want to necessarily fight war. This isn't about them wanting to. This is about what needed to be done to show Israel that they cannot continue to act with impunity, which is what they've been doing this entire time.
Yeah, exactly. Fee, where can people find your work, especially because you're doing a series of releases of the videos that you made, aren't you, from the West Bank?
Yeah, so you can find my work on YouTube and Rumble, and Rumble it always just takes forever now because it's like banned in Russia by certain, which is insane because I don't know why that would happen. I don't have all the details, but if without a VPN it's banned, and a VPN decreases your internet substantially. So it's been tough to get the videos there, but I have all my latest there as well. And Twitter, I will start streaming live more because now my channel can do that, and I've learned the process. But I don't have a team behind me. You know, it's just me. I have a few people that help around a little bit, and so it does take time. But I did work with a really great Palestinian journalist in the West Bank for 2 of these interviews. So there's a one coming, and you all need to watch those because those get so shadow banned and so completely just thrown off the algorithm. Anything to do with Palestine, of course, especially. So please go on Twitter, and I share everything there, on X, whatever. Fiorella Isabel is my handle. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks, Fee, and it was really great talking to you, and thank you so much for having gone there and having brought out the stories that, of course, nobody's going to be hearing in the West. Really, thank you. Great work. Take care.
Thanks.